She didn't come back because she missed him. She came because her brother was sitting in a shipping container on the South Docks, and Varric was the only man in Vancouver with the key. The cab driver took the Burrard Bridge slowly. Either he didn't know where he was going, or he knew exactly where he was going and was buying himself time. Imogen didn't rush him. She sat in the back seat with her coat pulled across her lap. It no longer closed over her stomach, hadn't for 6 weeks, and watched the Vancouver rain drag grey curtains across the North Shore mountains until the mountains disappeared entirely. She was 32 weeks. The midwife in Kelowna had told her to stay off her feet. She'd said a lot of things, actually. Imogen had listened, nodded, paid in cash, and taken the next bus back to the one-bedroom apartment she'd been renting under a name that wasn't hers. That had been 3 weeks ago, before the call. The cab stopped on Dunleavy, half a block from the warehouse district. "This is as far as I go," the driver said. Imogen paid him with 2 20s, didn't wait for change, and stepped out into the cold. The wind off the inlet cut straight through her wool cardigan. She'd bought it oversized on purpose. One of those brown, shapeless things from a discount bin that made her look like she was drowning in fabric. It hadn't hidden anything in 2 months. She walked. Each step sent a low ache from her pelvis up through her spine, a grinding pressure that had become so familiar she'd stopped naming it. The baby was sitting low today, had been for 3 days. She pressed a hand to her side, feeling the solid curve of a heel pressing back against her ribs. The building she was looking for didn't have a sign. It didn't need one. It had a steel door, a camera mounted where you'd least expect it, and a man with no visible weapon who held himself like a man who'd never needed one. He looked at her face, then at her stomach. The professional blankness flickered, just once. "I need to see Varric," Imogen said. Her voice was flat. She'd practiced flat on the bus. Flat was the only register that didn't shake. The man didn't move. "Name." Imogen Dowd. "He'll know it." He pressed 2 fingers to his ear, turned slightly away. She heard nothing but the rain and the sound of a forklift somewhere deep in the building behind him. He turned back. His face gave nothing away, inside. She followed him through a concrete corridor that smelled of machine oil and something sharper underneath, something metallic and cold. There were doors along the left side, all closed. She counted 5. Old habit. She'd spent 2 years counting things for Varric. Invoices, manifests, the kinds of numbers that appeared in 2 sets of books simultaneously and meant entirely different things in each. She'd been good at it. That was the problem. The man stopped outside a door at the end of the corridor. He knocked twice, opened it without waiting for an answer, and stepped aside. Varric was at his desk. He didn't look up immediately. He was reading something, a single sheet of paper, typed, unfolded. His reading glasses were on, which she'd never seen before, because she'd never been in this room when he was off guard. One hand rested on the desk. The other held a pen, though he wasn't writing. He was the kind of man who held a pen the way other men held weapons, loosely, without thinking, always available. He was 41. She'd seen his file. She'd organized it. He read to the bottom of the page, took the glasses off, set them on the desk with the kind of deliberate care that told her he already knew who was standing in the doorway, and he was deciding what face to wear when he looked up. He looked up. The silence that followed was the loudest thing Imogen had heard in 9 months. Varric's eyes moved from her face to the undeniable fact of her stomach in exactly the same sequence the guards had, but his held. He didn't flinch. He didn't speak. He just looked, and his expression did something she didn't have a word for. It didn't go hard. It went perfectly, absolutely still, the way ice forms over a river, everything moving underneath and nothing showing on the surface. "Dowd," he said. His voice was exactly as she remembered it, low, uninflected, like a number that didn't balance. "Varric." She stayed in the doorway. She hadn't been invited in. "Sit down." "I'd rather stand." He leaned back in his chair. His eyes didn't leave her. "Close the door, then." She did. The latch caught. The room was small, utilitarian. Desk, 2 chairs, a filing cabinet, a window that faced a brick wall. No art, no personal effects. She'd worked for him for 2 years and never been inside his actual office. She'd sat across from him in boardrooms, in the back seats of town cars, in the private room of a restaurant in Gastown, where the tables were bolted to the floor. She'd seen him make decisions worth millions with less expression than most people use to order coffee. She had never seen him look like this. "You're going to tell me how long," he said. 8 months. "You left 9 months ago." "I know when I left." He was quiet. The pen turned once between his fingers. "So you knew when you went?" "No, I found out 6 weeks after." The pen stopped. "And you didn't come back?" "No." Imogen crossed her arms over her chest. There was nowhere else to put them. The coat was useless for that, and kept her voice even. "I'm not here about that. My brother is being held at your South Dock. I want him released." "Your brother broke into a warehouse I own." "He's 22. He didn't know it was yours." "Most people don't." Varric set the pen down flat on the desk. "That's generally the point." "I have something you want." She pulled a USB drive from her coat pocket and set it on the edge of the desk without stepping closer. "Everything I copied before I left. All of it. The secondary ledgers, the rerouted transfers, the accounts that don't appear in any filing, and the source." He looked at the drive. He didn't touch it. "You've had this for 9 months, he said. "I've had it. And you kept it. As insurance." Varric was quiet for a long moment. He looked at the drive, then at her, then at the place where her coat failed to meet in the middle. Something shifted in his jaw. "You knew someone was skimming before you left." "I knew someone was trying to pin it on me before I left." She said it without heat, which was harder than it sounded. She had spent 9 months not being angry out loud. The secondary accounts had my access credentials attached. Every transaction. I had 2 choices: stay and let you find the discrepancy on your own timeline, or go and copy everything before I stopped having access. I chose to go. You chose not to tell me. You would have put me in that shipping container while you sorted it out. She looked at him steadily. "You know that's true." He didn't deny it. That at least was honest. "The source," he said. "It's on the drive. 3 years of transfers. 64,000 a month routed through a shell in Burnaby. The authorization signature belongs to your operations manager." She paused. "Aldrich Fenner, you promoted him 8 months ago." The stillness in Varric's face became something else. She watched him process it. The amount, the timeline, the name, and she watched the calculation happen behind his eyes the way it always had, rapid and invisible and utterly without sentiment. "You verified this," he said. "I'm a bookkeeper. Verifying is what I do." He picked up the drive, held it between 2 fingers, examining it as though the answer to a different question might be written on the casing. "Why come now?" "My brother." "Not the baby." Imogen said nothing. Her hands pressed flat against the sides of her stomach, without her meaning them, too, an involuntary gesture. She'd stopped being embarrassed about around month 6, when the baby started taking up enough space that she was constantly aware of it. Varric stood up. He didn't do it slowly or quickly. He just stood, and the room rearranged itself around the fact of him the way rooms always did. He was a big man, not in a loud way, but in the way of things built to last, with a kind of density that made the air feel different on that side of the desk. There was a scar along his left jaw that she'd spent a lot of time not looking at once. He came around the desk. He stopped 4 feet away from her. "You're 8 months in," he said. "You rode a bus from wherever you've been staying to come here and trade evidence for your brother's release. Kelowna, and yes. Not for a crib, not for a doctor, not for—" He stopped. The muscle in his jaw worked once silently. "You rode a bus to trade." "That's what I said." Dowd. His voice changed. Not louder, lower. The register that meant he was choosing each word the way he chose everything, with precision and without apology. "What were you going to do after? After your brother? After the drive? Where were you going to go?" She hadn't let herself think past the next step in 9 months. It was how she'd gotten this far. Back to Kelowna. To what? To my apartment, my prenatal appointments, my life. Your life. He said it like he was reading a number that didn't add up. Which is what, exactly? A furnished room and a cash job and a fake name, and then what? You deliver a loan and… That's my business. It was your business. He closed the distance between them in 2 steps. He didn't touch her. He stopped close enough that she would have had to step back to keep comfortable space, and she didn't step back. It stopped being only your business when you walked in here. Don't. Her voice stayed flat, but the word came out too fast. Don't make this. Look at me. He didn't say it hard. He said it like a request, which was worse somehow, because Varric never requested anything. She looked at him. His eyes were dark, and they were doing the thing she remembered. Taking stock, cataloguing. She had thought when she first worked for him that it would feel dehumanizing, to be assessed like a ledger entry. It hadn't felt that way. It had felt unaccountably like being seen. You ran because Fenner set you up, he said. Yes. And you ran without telling me, because you assumed I would act before I confirmed. You would have. Probably. He didn't look away, and you've been in Kelowna for 9 months, on your own, because you were protecting yourself. And… He stopped again. She watched him look at her stomach, and something in his face moved beneath the ice, the way things do in rivers in March, when the surface breaks, because you were protecting both of you. She didn't answer. Her throat was doing something she hadn't accounted for. He turned, walked back to his desk, picked up his phone. Soren. A pause. Release him. South Dock. Now. He set the phone down. That was it. No conditions stated, no exchange confirmed. Imogen stared at him. The drive, she said. Keep it. Send me the files digitally. I'll have my people verify the chain of custody without the original. That she blinked. That's not how you operate. No, he looked at her directly. It's not. The room was very quiet. Outside, the rain had intensified. She could hear it against the narrow window, the particular sound of a Vancouver downpour hitting industrial roofing. What do you want? She said. Fenner gets handled today. That's done. He folded his hands on the desk the way he did when he was about to lay out terms. She knew that gesture. She'd transcribed the aftermath of it 100 times. What I want is the answer to a question. She waited. The night you left, he said, the files on your desk were already sorted. Your handover notes were finished. You briefed the replacement protocols. His eyes held hers. You planned the exit. Yes. You planned it, and you didn't come to me. I told you why. You told me the practical reason. He was quiet for a moment. I'm asking about the other one. She stood in the middle of his office with 8 months of exhaustion in her bones and a child pressing against her spine, and she thought about all the ways she could answer that didn't include the truth. She was a very good bookkeeper. She could make numbers say almost anything. You don't leave room, she said. You're not cruel. Not for its own sake, but you calculate everything. I knew if I told you, you'd calculate whether to keep me, whether I was an asset or a liability, whether the baby was a resource or a complication. She swallowed. I didn't want to be calculated. Something in his face went very still, and then slowly it didn't. That's fair, he said. She had not been expecting that. It's fair, he said again, as though testing the weight of it. I would have. He held her gaze and didn't look away from it. I'm telling you, I know that too. He picked up the pen from the desk, set it down again. The gesture was uncharacteristically unguarded. You've been doing this alone for 9 months because you assumed you'd have to. I'm saying you don't have to anymore. I'm saying it plainly because I think that's what you respond to. I'm not going to make this into something it isn't. She looked at him for a long moment. Outside, a radio crackled somewhere in the corridor and went silent. I need a doctor, she said. Her voice came out smaller than she intended, a real one. I've been going to a free clinic under a different name, and I haven't had a proper scan in 6 weeks, and She stopped. This was the part she hadn't planned past. This was the edge of what she'd allowed herself to want. Sit down, Dowd. I said I'd rather stand. You've been on a bus for 4 hours, and your right hand has been pressed against your lower back since you walked in. He said it without inflection. Just what he observed. Sit down. She sat down. The chair was hard and cold and better than standing. He made one call. The doctor arrived 23 minutes later. She counted, because counting was how she managed things that otherwise felt unmanageable. He was a compact man in his 50s with a portable ultrasound unit and the specific manner of a person who had long ago learned not to ask unnecessary questions. Imogen lay back in a supply room down the hall on a folding cot someone had produced without explanation. The gel was cold, the wand pressed across her stomach, and the screen flickered, and then the sound filled the small room, steady and fast and impossibly loud for something so small. Varric stood in the doorway. He hadn't asked to come. He hadn't waited to be invited. He was just there, in the frame of the door, his hands at his sides, and when the heartbeat came through the speaker, he went the color of old concrete. Strong, the doctor said, very strong. Good position, good weight for the gestational age. The mother is. He glanced at Imogen, tired, blood pressure's low. She needs rest and she needs to stop traveling. She's stopping, Varric said, from the doorway. I'm in the room, Imogen said. I know. He looked at her then, not at the screen. You're stopping. She should have argued. She had a list of arguments. She'd been building it on the bus, brick by careful brick, every reason this was temporary and transactional and would not require her to trust anyone she wasn't certain of. The heartbeat continued, steady and entirely uncomplicated, insisting on its own existence in the way only new things can. I'm not waiving anything, she said, not signing anything, not agreeing to anything I haven't read line by line. I wouldn't expect you to. Something at the corner of his mouth moved barely. You're the best I've ever had at reading the fine print. The doctor pretended he hadn't heard any of that. He kept moving the wand. Looks like a girl, he said quietly. Neither of them spoke for a moment. A girl, Varric said, very quietly. She didn't look at him, but she heard it. That particular flatness, that wasn't coldness. That was the sound of a man encountering a number so large it exceeded his available framework. I didn't want to know, Imogen said, to the ceiling. Neither did I, said Varric, until just now. Later, after the doctor left, after Soren appeared with tea she hadn't asked for, and disappeared without meeting her eyes, she sat in the chair by the supply room door with her coat back on, and her hands around a paper cup that was gradually warming her palms, and she thought about Kelowna and the bus and the furnished apartment with its second-hand furniture and its window that faced a parking structure. Varric sat across from her on an overturned crate, which was, she suspected, the least dignified position he'd occupied in a decade. He looked at her with that still, calculating face, and he said, I'm going to tell you what I can offer. You tell me what you can accept. We'll find where the numbers match. She almost laughed. She didn't, because her throat was doing the thing again. That's the most you thing you've ever said to me, she said. Probably, he held her gaze. Is it enough to start with? Outside, the rain had slowed to something quieter, that particular West Coast drizzle that wasn't really rain at all, just the city breathing. Somewhere across the dock, a container ship's horn sounded twice, low and distant, like a question nobody had answered yet. Imogen looked at her hands around the cup, at the curve of her coat over her stomach, at the man sitting on a crate in an industrial supply room, offering her a ledger with space for her name in it, not as a liability, not as a line item, but as something he hadn't had a column for before and was, very slowly, learning to account for. Show me the numbers, she said. Then we'll see.